my own classmate, Mrs. Sindhu, who is a registered dietitian and has over 20 years of experience in clinical nutrition and dietetics. She's a very familiar face in Malayalam television as a guest speaker in various health and nutrition shows across different channels. And she's there in YouTube as well. She's currently working as consultant clinical nutritionist at 3 centers in Kerala. She's also pursuing her PhD at Avinashalingam Deemed University, Coimbatore, where we all have just grown up as a batch. And she is also the current vice president of Association for Evidence-Based Dietetics Nutrition, which is a charitable non-profit society formed by and for clinical dietitians in Cochin. Hats off to you. She's a regular columnist in popular health magazines and has presented several papers in scientific conferences. We are extremely happy to present you at this Kahu forum, and I'm sure it will be a knowledgeable treat for every one of us. Welcome.
So here I'm going to take you through this topic on picky eating. Before I begin, there's always this confusion about we do not know how to identify picky eaters, and there's always this problem that whenever a child says no to something, we tag them as, oh, he's being so picky in choosing foods, or he's so picky in choosing food. But there's a thin line here where we need to understand what is the cause for it and also understand what picky eating really means. So I'm just going to share with you some of the insights which I came through while I was researching on this topic. So what the research says now is that there is no universally specific definition which you can think for a picky eating behavior, and there is no agreement on the tool which can be used to identify picky eating. There's been several research studies which have supported the use of different questionnaires. These are some of the questionnaires which you can get, and it's available freely in most of the internet platforms. And I believe that in India, I'm not sure whether anyone is using a questionnaire to understand picky eating behavior in a child. But in my practice, I generally get a recall from the parents as well as I have a conversation with the kid. And let me put this fact into a perspective. Every kid, by the time they are 2 to 3 years old, they tend to observe things and analyze things at home, and they start developing their own feeding habits. So it's essential that we understand that concept, and having a conversation with the kid also is very important. Many a times I have seen parents just coming over to me, asking them about specific defined, symptoms or conditions wherein there is a presence of a nutritional deficiency. It can be a failure to gain weight, can be decline in psychological function, and there can be a severe dependency on nutrients. Specifically, we need supplements for this kind of a condition. Picky eating, many a times it is just a temporary condition which gets rectified as a child ages and becomes an adult. But mind you, one thing here, that unless and until we rectify the problem at a young age, it can move to severe, eating disorders in future. Next slide, please. This is one of the I could find only on one of the study which was happened in India in Hyderabad, where they say that out of the 1,600 plus student kids that they screened, around 60% of them had picky eating behavior. Prevalence seems to be increasing with age, and the mean weight, of course, mean weight and height seems to be lower than that of non-picky eaters. This is the only study which I found specifically in the Indian population. Next slide, please. And another study which I found very interesting, again, this is from outside India, but then I found it very interesting to know that how we can predict the problem of picky eating behavior in children. One thing is to understand whether they have any feeding difficulties when they are as a child. Do they have any such problem, or are we introducing the complementary feeding, especially the lumpy food, the transition that you make from the very liquidy food to the lumpy food? Are we taking a delay in this thing, which causes a picky eating behavior by the time the child is 38 months? Another indicator is if the child starts showing choosy behavior at the age of, say, 1.5 years. In this study, again, 56% of the population had this problem. And the interesting feature here is parents, specifically mother, if they were very worried about this condition, it used to increase up to 50%. And even the lesser worried mothers also had a contribution, even if it is in a lesser percentage of 17%. And another important fact is how we provide the ready-to-eat foods for these children. And that has been postulated as one of the predictor for later picky eating. Next slide, please. Now, moving to the pathogenesis of eating, this is a very interesting theory. I'm not sure whether everybody knows about it, but I found this theory very interesting, wherein they talk about a super taster theory, which states that the ability to taste sweetness and bitterness may be genetically related to the number of tastes buds that an individual has. And it is postulated that super tasters have more taste buds compared to a regular person, which contributes to their sensitivity of having a very sensitive understanding for bitterness. So most of the foods which we feel are okay to taste, they might feel that it is too bitter, and at the end they tend to avoid that particular food. So this can happen at a very young age, but in adults, if you see this kind of a theory, there are not much studies postulating that this kind of a super taster theory is existing among adults. So which means that possibly as a child grows, this sensation or the sensitivity for this theory or the sensitivity to bitterness will come down. And on average, they say around 25% of any population, if you see, have this criteria of being super tasters. Okay. The second reason for picky eating could be due to the slower growth rate which a child might have. So during the toddler age, their growth pattern is a little sluggish. So there are some physiological conditions which can trigger this balance and cause a difference in their taste perception. Emotional state and mood swing is another reason. We all consider that only adults have these mood swings and emotional states, but children also have a problem with mood swings and emotional state, and they do not think logically at the age. So we reason out, and no matter what we have a problem or an emotional situation, either we binge eat or we overeat or undereat. It is a phenomena that we follow, but children, they do not have this kind of a logic behind it. So they literally end up not eating at all. And parental influence is very crucial as far as picky eating is concerned. Parents who have this trait of having picky eating behavior as children or as adults also, and if you showcase this kind of a behavior in front of a child in the during the family meal, and or at any point of time wherever you are having your meal or your food with your child, and you show any kind of a behavior, there is a tendency for the child to repeat or just adapt to that kind of a behavior. So that's another thing. And neophobia and slow adaptation. I have seen a lot of children who are not exposed to foods having this problem of neophobia, wherein they do not know what is happening. They do not know the kind of food that is provided to them. Everything comes in a bowl. You mix everything together, and they are force fed many a time. So they do not know whether it is the rice which is mixed with the dal and the vegetable, or is a food supposed to look like this? They have literally no clue. So I believe that neophobia to one extent is because of the lack of exposure to the different food groups or the foodstuffs that they have around them. And the slower adaptation is mostly associated with the fact that each child is different. You cannot expect every child to behave in the same way. A child might take some more time to get adjusted to a particular food or a taste. Some children have fear of spice, some children have difficulty with swallowing, some may have difficulty in chewing. So all these things can cause changes in their behavior as far as eating is concerned. So we need to understand these factors before being just thinking that, no, they don't like the taste and they are picky in their nature. And the last one is the genetic and the environmental influences, of course. Just like how the other eating disorders are, even in picky eating, there is a genetic predisposition and you cannot avoid it, because genetically there are certain acquired traits that can come into the newborns and the children. So if the family has any such people, especially the parents and the grandparents, if they have any such issues as a child, and I'm sure that kind of a trait can even move ahead to the next generation. Next slide. the consequences of picky eating. Overall, I'm just listing out all the consequences which can happen because I didn't want to explain it further. Underweight is a very common problem. Nutrition deficiencies, definitely they are going to get because they tend to choose only a certain specific number of food and they avoid a lot of familiar as well as unfamiliar food. So nutrition deficiencies are very rampant. Recurrent constipation is a problem because many a times these children refuse to take vegetables and fruit mostly. So they end up with recurrent constipation, which even happens at a very young age as to, I have had mothers calling me and asking me like for a 1-year-old, imagine getting constipation. So when I look into the reason, then only you realize where the problem is. The risk of thinness can happen during adolescence, and it can even develop as a eating disorder in future. And the other consequences which I have written, lower and higher intake of energy, is because in my experience, I have seen some children taking high energy food. So it's not like every time a picky eater is always taking a low energy food. Same thing coming to proteins, I have seen in both extremes. That's why I put a slash over there, which indicates that there are mothers who are very particular of giving their children protein, too much of protein. They give 2 eggs, 3 eggs a day. I wonder how do you expect a child to eat after taking so many eggs? So these are things which we need to understand, and the consequences of micronutrient deficiency and poor diet diversity are the things which we need to look into really well, because those are the things which are left out. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Now I'm just rushing through the screening and the assessment, what I do in my OPD. There are a lot of screening and assessment screens, things which we can use. You can use pediatric STA forms, you can do assessment. The easier ones are the growth chart and the height and the weight table, which will give a better understanding of the growth pattern of the child. Next slide, please. And estimating nutrients, of course, you have the RDA, but I follow the holiday cigar method, or you can follow the bedside method to analyze what is the actual requirement for the child for that particular weight that the child has, because RDA tends to overestimate because it is only giving a rough estimate of the total population, not exactly to the weight of the individual child. So it's better to use these two methods for as far as energy is concerned. Proteins and other requirements, it's fair enough to use the RDA. Next slide, please. And these are the height and weight. Many times you might even get children who are very tall for their age. So it's better to use the weight for height as an estimate rather than going for weight for age. Next slide, please. And this is again how you need to understand what weight should be there for each child. This is a very good marker. And understanding the catch-up growth requirements. Next slide, please. And once you find that the child's requirement is low and you have identified the grading of malnutrition, you can straight away go to these equations. This is the easiest way to calculate the catch-up growth requirements, and very beneficial. And this is like your target to achieve when you plan your diet. Okay, next slide, please. And these are some of the or the suggestions which I want to give. That is, be very realistic in your expectation of the child's portion size. It's never that same as that of an adult. Next slide. And a repetitive exposure to unfamiliar foods. This I wanted to stress it over here because you need at least 10 to 15 positive experiences as far as the child is concerned. This many times you are supposed to keep the child motivated. It's not like take 15 days at a row, but at different points of time, make environment very friendly for the child. Look for measures wherein you can make the child understand the importance of food by just taking them to the grocery store or the vegetable store and asking them to pick up the foods or making them touch the food. All this helps. Next slide, please. And non-food rewards. I have seen parents rewarding their child with some gifts and toys and PlayStation and whatnot. Just giving a pat on the back or giving a hug or any kind of a TLC care is more than enough for a child to understand that what he or she has done as far as completion of a meal is concerned is nice. Next slide, please. And positive approaches, all these are positive measures which we can do to avoid the negativity. I recently had a child who was compelled to eat by their grandparents and the parents, and the child literally is in a state wherein the child refuses to eat any food at all. So now I'm taking a review for that patient. Monthly review is happening. I tell the mother and the parent, both the parents are doctors. So you can imagine how the situation is. And it's very difficult to convince doctor where the problem is and how to tackle with it. So these are the measures. And look at the child, looking at the parent, and it's a way in which we can try to figure out where the problem is, involve the child. And using of any of these, what do you say, laptops or your tab or anything as a source for inspiration your child to see some of the good health videos that are available also is a method which I follow in my OPD. Next slide. And kitchen gardening, this is at the community level at schools and at daycares, wherever possible. I take an effort to make sure that this kind of work is happening in schools. I have worked at 1 or 2 schools wherein I have had a salad making event, and it was super fun. You should see the enjoyment on the faces of the children who were like really not at all liking the vegetables and fruit. So these are methods which we can follow. Next slide. And this is again a market day at school, so as part of school promotion for eating vegetables and fruits. Next slide. And this is again, yeah, it's over. It's over. And this is again the counseling which I do at home, and that's my daughter. I keep her photo as a motivation. Okay, she is very much into like cooking. So we have had a session wherein she bagged the 2nd prize for being the little chef. So it's a motivation. I show this to kids who are 2 years, 3 years old. It helps. Okay. So with that, I'm concluding, and thank you for this opportunity. And the last slide is again the same thing, which I was just telling about reassuring parents. And remember one thing, this picky eating is not something which is very stagnant. It will go on its own. Many people don't realize it. But if you pick it at the right time and give the child the right kind of motivation and help, it will not develop into an eating disorder later in life. Thank you.
So there's no questions. Thank you so much.